before we begin, I will just say that I have known Itzhak my entire life. However, the most important Perlman in my life growing up was not Itzhak, unfortunately. My dear sister, who you just heard interview Joan Nathan in the last hour, is 13 years older than I am. And my earliest memories in life are of being kicked out of my sister's room. And the reason I was being kicked out was because she wanted to be with her lovely redhead boyfriend. And her lovely redhead boyfriend, Noah, when I would sneak into the room, would grab me and catch me, and he would say, "One day you're going to be a man, but that day is not today." And that is Noah Perlman, who is Itzhak and Toby's son. And that was my first Perlman friend. But we are here with the lesser known Perlman. And of course, Itzhak needs no introduction. Everybody knows Itzhak Perlman. You know him as a storyteller and as a jokester and as a lover of Chinese food and as a cook and as someone who loves to fish and a friend of Sesame Street characters and of presidents and the father of 5 children and a grandfather and winner of medals and lover of shtisel, which he calls schnitzel, and also because he plays the fiddle. Itzhak, it's really, really lovely to have you here. Thank you. Where are you speaking to us from?
I'm speaking from Long Island, and we are in quarantine here. And I must say, it's very nice for us anyway. I mean, the weather hasn't been so good. Yes, there was a very nice day. So we're here, and we are watching. What did we? No, we didn't. We are not on Schnitzel anymore. We are now watching Fauda. So that means that every evening you get a heart attack. Because we're in the 3rd season. So anyway, and we are cooking.
And you told me you watched Unorthodox too, right?
Oh, we watched Unorthodox, absolutely.
What did you think of it?
I thought it was terrific. It was really terrific. It was very and wonderful acting. So we really enjoyed it very much.
Okay, so Itzhak, I want to begin, and I say that everyone knows you as an icon, as a recognizable figure, as a Medal of Freedom winner, and Grammys and Emmys and all of that. But I actually want to talk to you about something completely different. You were born in 1945 in Tel Aviv to 2 Polish immigrant parents, and I imagine you ate a lot of gefilte fish growing up. My first question to you: you spent the first 13 years of your life in Israel.
Right.
And my first question to you is, those were the earliest days of the state. Do you have any memories of Yom Ha'atzmaut during those early years in the 50s?
Well, I remember, always the parade, the Yom Ha'atzmaut parade. Of course, I remember that where we lived, our building, which was in the north part of Tel Aviv, it was not too far from the zoo, which does not exist anymore. And I remember even hearing the lions roar from where we lived. We lived on the Hakalir, which was near the Shlomo HaMelech street and so on. And I remember during there was a war. What was the war until, let me see, I left Israel in 1958.
So there was a war. The Sinai campaign. The
Sinai war. And we lived in a building that had no basement. And so I remember my parents put me near a corner in the middle of the apartment. And that was it, and then I remember the sirens and so on. So that was one of the things that it was sort of a common thing to talk about problems, to talk about Israeli problems, and of course the Sinai War and so on and so forth. And of course, a lot of what was fantastic at that time, which I don't think that if you're not in Israel, you can't really experience it is when Friday night happened and then Saturday happened, and there was a kind of a quietness that, it's that you knew that that was the Sabbath, and where we lived, literally no cars were moving, nothing. It was just really quiet. And so I always remember that, because later on coming to New York and so on and so forth, you don't have that kind of quiet. Well, of course, we're talking about I was born in 45, and when we moved into this neighborhood of North Tel Aviv, I was like 8 years old, and so on. So I remember at that time, this entire kind of atmosphere during the holidays. Of course, on Yom Kippur, quiet. Everything was quiet. You cannot duplicate that today. But anyway.
And how much was it sort of a home of immigrants? Was there a clear kind of Polish immigrant environment in the house?
No, my parents. I don't know. My parents were not particularly social. They were they were busy making me bugging me about practicing. That's what they were busy about, and I remember my teacher always accused them of having a social life and not watching me practice, which of course was totally untrue. They had no social life whatsoever, and we had some relatives, cousins.
And you were an only son.
I was never. Absolutely.
Only child.
We had cousins, and we would see them occasionally at that time, at the very beginning. Later on, when I came to the United States, and then we came back to Israel, then they would see more of their cousins. Right now, we still have, I think, second or third cousins, which are actually very friendly with our kids, So.
And actually, perhaps not many people know this about you, but one of your cousins is perhaps the most recognizable Israeli of all times.
That's right. He was, when you look at the very famous photograph of, is it 3 or 4? I think 3 soldiers looking at the wall, and the soldier in the middle was married to my cousin who passed away, but he's kind of recognized everywhere. Even you go to the airport, you see there's a huge picture on the wall on your way to the flight. And there he is. There's Itzhak.
Right, the 3 paratroopers at the Kotel right after the 6-day war.
Yeah.
During the 6-day war. Itzhak, and what language did you speak at home?
At home, Hebrew. Hebrew was at home, and when my parents did not want me to understand, they spoke basically a lot of Yiddish. And then I started to understand the Yiddish. Then they started to switch to Polish, and then that I couldn't understand. But there was nothing really to understand when they spoke Yiddish, because there was basically only one sentence. He doesn't practice. That was the sentence. So it was not a big deal anyway. But we had a very traditional house. My mother, we were kosher, obviously, and so on. And it was not very, very religious, but we would go to shul on the holidays, but not to a fancy shul. There was very interesting. It was an apartment building next to the school that I was going to, which was about a block away from where we lived. And they would rent a room in the first floor and on the basement floor. And that room would be for showing movies. And because we would, it was far to go to the movie theater. So we could actually go to a little place, and it would seat maybe 20, 30 people. And would show some, they would rent a projector, and the people who were in charge, I don't know who was even in charge of it, would show movies. Now, during the holidays, it became a shul, a synagogue. And so I remember going there to, on Rosh Hashanah or on Yom Kippur and so on and so forth. The only time that I would go to a, quote, proper synagogue, I remember, was for my bar mitzvah. And then I went to this fancy schmancy synagogue, and it was quite wonderful. It was amazing. But the rest of the time was very much the neighborhood.
And it's like I'm going to come back to your childhood, but just jumping many decades forward, in the 80s, you were touring with the Israeli Philharmonic in Poland, and you performed in Warsaw, I believe. And what was it like for you, the son of these Polish immigrants who had come in the 30s to Israel, to come back with the Israeli Philharmonic to perform in Poland?
Very, very meaningful, very exciting. What I remember even more vividly is concerts in Moscow.
Because it was the first time that the Israeli Philharmonic performed in the Soviet
Yes.
Union.
You see, what happened was that before I was in Moscow with them, like several years before, there was a situation where the Philharmonic was going to go to Moscow and perform. There was several years before, and I remember vividly going to the airport and standing at the ticket counter, and right there it was canceled. So I always said that if you want to know Israel's relationship with other countries, if the Philharmonic goes there, the relationship is good. If they don't go there, it's so-so. But then later on, we went there. So we went to Poland, we went to Hungary. But what I remember was playing the Hatikva in Moscow. And it was indescribable. The emotional thing, and the thing is, a lot of the people in the audience did not know it, but it was for us emotional to actually play Hatikva in Moscow. So these were, very, very exciting times. Not too much food in Russia, by the way. Nothing. I mean, forget about it. It looked good, but there was nothing there.
So Itzhak, as everybody knows, when you were 13 years old, you came to America. You were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and that sort of put your entire life on a new trajectory, on a different trajectory. You came to study at Juilliard. But what did your friends in the Shchuna in Tel Aviv, what did they think? I mean, there wasn't even television in Israel. What did they think about you suddenly going to America to be on American TV? What did they think?
Well, they were all very excited for me, I think, at least from what I could tell. And I would actually, at that time, believe it or not, we would actually write letters. I mean, in handwriting, I mean, how are you? Nice to see you. Not too many. There were a few. And I missed my friends. I missed them very much. When I came there, when I came to the States, I was kind of depressed, because my father was still in Israel, because we had to do stuff to sell the business and stuff and the apartment. So I came to the States just with my mother. So, but my friends, sometimes we would send pictures and so on and so forth. But it was difficult. It was difficult.
And what was it like for you? I mean, Israel then it was during the Tzena. It was a time where, Israel was a poor socialist country where there was none of the sort of consumerism of America, and suddenly you show up in New York with all the lights and all the, you go into, I don't know, Zabar's, and there's 400 different kinds of cheeses or whatever. I don't know.
Zabar's not then. That we're talking about 1958. I was no way near Zabar's. It was still my mother's cooking.
And but what was it like for you to suddenly land in New York? Did you even speak English?
No English. I learned my English from watching TV. It was, and then I would study it. Took some school. I did not go to school. I went. There was a program in New York. It was called High School of the Air, and they would get. That was later, not immediately, but later I actually took. They would send you mimeograph sheets of homework, and you would listen to the radio and you would do the homework, and then they would send you a teacher, and so that was all because, believe it or not, I had to practice. So this whole business of the practicing, leaving Israel and going back to New York has not changed at all. It was still the main topic. Do you practice? Don't you practice? Et cetera, et cetera. But to answer your question about it was a incredible contrast. First of all, TV. I mean, my God, television, never heard of it before. Wonderful. And also the other thing that was quite a challenge was at least the beginning, because we would go on tour with the people who played on the Sullivan, with the Sullivan show with all Israeli acts. There was a dance
Really?
troupe. Oh yeah, it was. That's why he came to Israel. Was everybody. There was a I don't know if you remember Ran Venama. Do you remember the
Hmm.
folk singers? They were
I don't remember, but I
and
know
then
about.
there was the Carmon dance troupe, and then there were duo pianists, and there was a whole bunch of, there was even a shadowgrapher from the Weizmann Institute who would make shadows of famous people like Joseph Stalin or or David Ben Gurion or something like that. It was a whole thing. So when we went on that tour, one of the great challenges is to find kosher food, because it was still kosher. So I basically lived a lot of the time on bread and sardines and eggs and stuff, no meat. And every now and then we would find I even remember till, can you imagine that? I don't know, when you get older, you'll see certain things you just totally forget and certain things you remember. I actually remember the two main kosher restaurants in New York.
What were they?
Siegel's and Gluckstern's. And I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, if you ask me other things, I said, well, I don't remember anything. Those I remember. And they used to serve you matzah ball soup with the noodles, and they used to put it in a metal cup, and they would have a plate, and they would pour the metal cup. That was the special way that they would do it. And I still remember. I can see it right now. So.
So you've mentioned practicing a lot, and this combining a few questions here from listeners, from Brian and others. You often have talked about the importance of practicing slowly, and you also there's a great story that you tell about how Heifetz asked you to play scales, and you impressed him not more through your scales than through your actual playing. And
that's correct.
And
yes.
When you were a kid, and
Yeah.
and my question to you, I was reading a few months ago about how Kobe Bryant throughout his career would go and shoot 1,000 free throws every day. And my question is, when you're at the top of your game, how do you maintain the mindset that it's really important to just practice? Like, do you still do scales? Do you still practice?
No, I right now I'm doing, it's called practice from necessity. If you know you're going to play something, and so you play through it, and you say, well, let's see, that sounds pretty good, or this thing is, I'm not quite sure of that, so I'll practice on that. But I just because, but I say to all my students, you've got to practice scales. Scales are the most important thing to maintain your technical facility. And so, when I was growing up, my teacher made me practice scales 1 hour just of scales every day, besides other stuff. I would practice about, when I was growing up, I practiced like 3 hours a day. So the first hour was scales, second hour was like etudes, which is kind of more like exercises, and then the third hour would be, like pieces that I could play in concert, and that actually happened to me until about the age of 17 or 18. That was my routine to do that.
And when you arrived in America, did you realize that that this was a new life? Did you imagine that you would live in New York for the rest of your life, that you wouldn't come back to Tel Aviv? And did you understand that?
The idea was to come and to study, that, as they say in Israel, the dream of everybody is to go to Hishtalmut. And that was my teacher said, one of the day you will go to Hishtalmut. Hishtalmut, I suppose, is to a translation is to, what is it? Complete yourself. So when you're in a small country such as Israel, it's always the dream to go abroad, to go to either Europe or to the States. And since I've heard of this a teacher who taught at the Juilliard School, even in Israel we heard. So that was the dream. And so when Sullivan came, and that was the intention, to stay in New York and to study at the Juilliard School.
And what do you think your life would have been like, or your career would have been like, had you stayed in Israel?
I have no idea, but it would have been difficult, you know.
Could you have had the same impact and opportunities?
I have no idea. I mean, sometimes, you know, that's a very good question, but I have absolutely no idea. I know that it was necessary to get out after a while. You know, it's a very natural thing. You know, even here in the States, sometimes when the students study with you for a number of years, after a while, you got to get out and have a change of scenery. You know, so a lot of students here, you know, for example, they would study with somebody here about 4 or 5 years, and then they will go to Europe. So it's the change is necessary, because after a while, and then there's actually, I know a teacher at the Juilliard School, you know, where she teaches a student 4 years and then they leave, just for the change. So that was my I had to go, and I was very lucky that Sullivan came. You know, it was very. I have no idea what would have happened.
But in many ways, Itzhak, even though you left Israel at 13, you in many ways have never really left Israel. You remained Itzhak. You never became Isaac. And everywhere you're an Israeli American. That's who you are. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that identity, about that dual identity?
Well, look, yeah, it's very funny that you mentioned I remained Yitzhak. I remember that the first, I got a scholarship from the, at that time it was called Norman Foundation. Now it's the America-Israel Foundation. And the person that gave me this scholarship, I even have a picture of it. His name, he was, I think, I believe, the second prime minister of Israel, Moshe Sharet. And he made
there's a picture of him shaking your hand, shaking his hand when you were a kid.
That's right. Yeah. And he said, change your names before you become famous. He was talking about the second names. So if they have, you know, like Strasberg or Goldberg, or that, change the name, because I think his name was Sheltok. Was it Sheltok? I think.
Exactly.
And anyway, but that was his, you know, so I always remember this is change your name before you become famous. But, you know, I always felt that for me, after I went to Israel, I left in 1958, and I think I came back to play with the Philharmonic in 1960. 7, I think, 66 or 67. And all I remember is coming back to Israel, the smell of the city, the flowers, you know, and it hit me, you know, even just stepping out of El Al, just the smell of the air was like, I'm home. I'm home. And it's still like that in certain way. When I go there, it's like, I go there, I smell the air, I'm home. I suppose that's what happens when you, you know, when you were born someplace. It's very strong.
And what has been the importance or the role of Israel in your career?
Well, all I know is that there's no particular role. It's just that that's who I am. I was born in Israel. You know, when I play with the Philharmonic, I play with Mishpocha. I play with my first conducting experience was with the Israel Philharmonic. And the reason it's because I figured out if I were going to fall on my face, it might as well be with friends, because, you know, I was playing with family. You know, I've recorded, of course, and with Zubin when he was there all the time. So we you know, we have a wonderful relationship. So it's, as I say, you know, it's coming home, not only just where I was born, but where I'm making a lot of music there. And you know, the country is so musical. And for me, it's one of the great things is, you know, when we always have tzoros there, always tzoros. And the more tzoros we have, the more people go to the concert halls and listen to music. And when people says, what do you think is the role of music? I say, well, the role of music is that to alleviate your soul from all the problems around the world. And right now, in the middle of these problems, still, when you look at the internet, you see so much music that's going on. That people cannot live without it. It's obvious. I think one of these days, I was thinking of today that when the when music is being played today, and you have a rest, I don't know. When you look at music, there's always notes and rests. And so right now, I think my suggestion is to increase the rests, to triple the rests, so that there'll be musical distancing between the rests. I know it doesn't make any sense, but it's kind of fun. That's my contribution for this pandemic.
I'm reminding you guys to send in your questions in the chat. And Itzhak, my mother, who is your dear friend, had a friend from high school. And that friend from high school claims that she saw you play when you were 17 years old, and went backstage after the concert and said that she would like to marry you. And in fact, that woman is your wife, Toby, of 55 years.
That's correct.
And my question is, what did you think when some woman comes up to you and says out of the blue that she wants to marry you? You didn't even know her.
Yeah, well, I just, I was kind of dumbfounded, and I went,
I bet.
That's all, It's that, look, I was 17 years old at that time, and so I was, for me, that was a new experience, and I suppose I took it as a compliment, but I did not totally react, verbally. I just kind of went, and so on. But but we became friends shortly afterwards, and then music we were on the same page. Let's put it that way, when it came to music, so on.
So you're confirming that story. It's true. Toby did say, "I want to marry you."
Totally true. Totally true. Good story.
So Itzhak, we have a few more questions, and then just a few questions from the audience. And you have managed throughout your career to bridge between the world of classical music and the world of sort of popular culture in a way that few have done, really. Is that something that that was important to you, that you always wanted to do? Was there something appealing about kind of combining classical music, very serious, of course, classical music, with a popular world of Sesame Street or of films and Oscars and performances and stuff like that?
Well, look, it was not something that was like, I had to do it. It was just a lot of these things that I did was because I wanted to have a good time. I wanted to it would be fun. It would be fun, for example, well, klezmer was the obvious thing. Klezmer was really fun, but klezmer, I was more sure that I knew what I was doing, especially, and of course, I got some nice instructions from the klezmer groups that I was playing with, but I still had klezmer in my ears when I was growing up in Israel and so on. So that was not a challenge. The challenge was to try and do some jazz. And that had to do with my social, when my friendship, the first time I was friendly with Andre Previn, who was who himself was a wonderful jazz pianist, and then in mid-course changed his career into the classical music and became a terrific conductor. He was music director of London Symphony and the Pittsburgh Symphony and so on and so forth. So we did some recordings together, and then I said, Andre, maybe we can do some jazz together? And he said, sure. I said, but I'm not sure I can do that because, all those jazz guys, they're all improvise. So he said, don't worry, I'll write it all out. And so he did. So we made 2 recordings where basically Andre wrote out my improvisation. And it was a lot of fun because I didn't have any, all I had to worry about was playing it in the right style. So I'll tell you what happened was that then I recorded made another record with this wonderful, legendary jazz pianist called Oscar Peterson, an incredible pianist. So during the recording session, that's where I actually improvised I had no music. I just had to do it by ear. And that was frightening because, I mean, these guys, they just do it effortlessly. But I discovered something very interesting. We did a take of some wonderful jazz song, and the producer said, he says, that did not sound stylistically correct. It sounded like klezmer. So that's the first time I discovered that I could maybe do some nice klezmer at the time that I was trying to do jazz. So, but it was all, and doing for the movies and stuff. It's a lot of fun. It gives variety, and but the important thing is not to forget your day job. And my day job is playing classical music and doing things in the repertoire, classical repertoire. But the jazz and the klezmer and all of that stuff for the movie music is wonderful. I loved it, and of course. I befriended the wonderful composer John Williams, who was movie composers, and of course I did the Schindler's List soundtrack, and that was not only unusual for me, but the way he writes for the violin is so terrific that it's got to fit. When you do something that's not classical, it's got to make sense. It shouldn't be like just for the sake of doing something different. It should actually work. But he is a wonderful composer, and so I had a fantastic time doing it, and it was very emotional because I did not know the whole story of Schindler, and that's when I started to find out. And of course, the first time that I actually recorded the soundtrack, that was the first time I saw the movie, and it was like mind-boggling. It was just, I almost lost it.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of composers, Megan Whitman is asking, what composers or musical genres are you listening to and thinking about during this time of Corona confinement?
I don't, I'm not gonna. I don't have anything special. Music is music. Mm-hmm. Music is music. I'm not going to start to think about, listening to requiems just because we are losing so many people. I'm just gonna. Music really for me is kind of an escape, and I'm sure that a lot of people think of music as an escape because it's that's what makes us forget for a while the reality. And humor is also an escape. It's quite evident.
Speaking of humor, since I know you and my dad have essentially built a 50-year-long friendship on exchanging jokes, I have a joke for you that comes from a...
I'm ready.
It comes from a Chabad rabbi for Dana's 50th birthday. Josh had their Chabad rabbi give us a shiur. So a man is walking down the street and he meets a Chabad rabbi, and the Chabad rabbi says to him, "Sir, by any chance are you a Jew?" And he says, "By chance I am a Jew." And the Chabad rabbi says to him, "Oh, that's so wonderful. In that case, can I ask you to complete our minyan?" And the guy says, "No. I don't want anything to do with organized religion." So the Chabadnik says, "Organized? If we were so organized, we would have a minyan."
That's true. I like that. So I'll tell you one, since we are talking about synagogues. So the man goes to the synagogue, and it's the first time that he's there. So the head, somebody from the synagogue is showing him around, and it's in the middle of a service. So he said this, and who is this man? He's never been there, Who is this man talking? He says, "That's our rabbi. He's giving a sermon right now." He says, and who is this other guy who is putting things away and lighting the candles? That's a shamus, and who is this guy who keeps waving his hands and pointing at people? And he says, That's our Hesedande. He says, Hesedande, what's a Hesedande? He said, when somebody stands up, you say, Hesedande. That's a joke. See, that's the problem with virtual thing. You don't hear the laughter. I mean, people right now are actually just they're on the floor with laughter, but you don't know that. Now, just because you don't think it's funny, never mind.
It's okay, but I've heard you tell better jokes. Okay, so
Oh
it's
my
like
God! Publicly you are insulting me. I love that. Oh, that's great.
Itzhak, so we have two more questions,
Yeah.
and they're sorry to everyone who there's many people asking questions. By the way, a lot of people say that your joke is very funny and that they're laughing, and that
Oh,
so
very good. Yeah, very good.
you've been vindicated.
Can you make me a recording of the laughter? I like
No
to.
problem. You'll get a
Good.
laugh
Thank
track.
you.
So, Itzhak, we have a question from Diana Livni in Chicago, and she asks, can you talk a little bit about playing with Nava, your daughter, in front of an audience?
Well, that was, we don't do that anymore, but at that time it was great. I mean, I loved, because we were practicing together, and then I love the way Nava plays. She's a beautiful, beautiful musician and a terrific pianist, and so it was a different experience than playing with somebody else, because it was like a family experience. And I don't know if you've seen, there's actually a movie in which we are playing together for I think 20 seconds. I think it's a Woody Allen movie.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody says, I love you. I don't remember the name of it, and so on. So it was a lot of fun to do it together. So, but now, she does some playing, and she's a mother. She has 4 children, and so she's got her life is busy.
Okay, so we have one last question from the audience, and then I have my final question. So my last question is from Susan Peltman. She says, a lot of us got to know you first on Sesame Street. And for me, she says, you're one of the most memorable moments on the show. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to be on Sesame Street?
Well, it was like coming home, because we would watch Sesame Street for our kids when they were growing up. We'd all watch Sesame Street, right? And then when they called me up and they said, would you do something? I said, oh my God, it's incredible. I would go there, and I said, I know this place because I've been watching it on TV all the time. So but the things that I discovered that I did not know before, which I knew at that time, was that Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch were the same person. In other words, it was the same person did both of the.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Both of the puppets. I think he recently passed away.
What? So they don't have scenes together?
Well, probably not.
Huh.
Probably not. Now somebody's going to call and going to prove me wrong by going to show it. But I think that the Big Bird and the Grouch were the same person. I mean, obviously not at the same time. Yes. Yeah. But it was great. I loved it. And then of course I did an Israeli version of that called.
Listeners are saying that you're correct, by the way. So
I'm correct.
Yes.
Okay. Oh. You see, you should listen to your audience. You see, they laugh at my joke. They say I'm correct with my information. You are being very, very sarcastic around here.
Itzhak, my final question is, as I see it, you have three professions. One is recording and performing violinist. The other one is a teacher. And in the last 20 years, you've added a third profession to your life, which is being a conductor. And I wanted to know if you could reflect a little bit on the differences between those sides of your life, of your professional life.
Well, first of all, let's not talk about the differences. Let's talk about the similarities. Mm-hmm. And the similarities is that I don't know if you can call similarity, but each activity is good for the other activity. So that if, for me to be a teacher is so much, it's so helpful in my performance. And for me to be a teacher is, and for me to be a conductor is also helpful to be a teacher. You know, it all has to do with the similarity about the necessity of listening in all of the three professions. Now, obviously, when you conduct, you are not really in control about how every individual plays. So you have to, so the only thing you can do is you can actually relay what you want from the musicians. And somehow I don't understand how that works. And I like it that there is a mystery there. I don't get it that you can stand on stage and start giving a downbeat, and if you have 3 or 4 different conductors, you will get different sounds from each person who is giving the downbeat. Or just, and it's a chemical reaction from the musicians to somebody who was on the podium, and I think it's amazing, you know. And so for me, that's a mystery when somebody says this person is a great. What makes a difference between a great conductor and a good conductor? The great conductor has something that it's an electric current between him or her and the audience and the orchestra, while a good conductor can know the score and knows everything, but sometimes not everything happens that's, shall we say, very exciting or anything like that. So, but why? What makes it like that? I have no idea. I have no idea. But all those 3 things I think support each other, and that's what I love about it, because I can, and of course, being a conductor, I'm, you know, I'm exposed to different repertoires, and so that's always nice. And just when people say to me, "What is your goal now that you're getting older and stuff?" And I say, my goal, and so far I've reached it, I think, is to always be interested in what I'm doing, not to be bored by what I'm doing. And I love what I'm doing right now. I love it, you know, I like it. I'm not bored by it, and I've been doing certainly certain same things for a long time, but I'm still excited. So that's my goal.
Well, that's a wonderful, wonderful message, I think, and I think everyone's expressing, Itzhak, in the chat here, that you've made everyone's life not boring by giving us endless pleasure and joy. And you know, every time we come to perform at the Manhattan JCC, you and Toby are in the first
Yes.
row. And it's always nerve-wracking for our musicians because they're in the green room beforehand and they say, Itzhak Perlman's in the first row and I'm going to be playing the violin 2 meters away from him. But thank you, Itzhak. This has been a real treat for all of us, and hope to see you soon, and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, and thank you very much. I had a great time. Thank you.
Toda. Bye,
Okay,
Itzhak.
bye.
Bye.